Hi, everyone. I would like to start by thanking ABSL for bringing us all together. It's a beautiful city and a beautiful venue, and glad to be having all the great interactions we have had today morning. We have a great panel right now for this discussion, important discussion on locations. I'll start by introducing our panel. We have Anna. Anna heads the Nestlé Business Services in Portugal. She has about 30 years of experience in finance and management. We have Fredis, who's director for the Invest Riga, and he actually has a background in the GBS industry, and right now he's working to get the best of the GBS into Riga.
Yes, before I switch to the dark side, as I joke.
Yeah. You always keep a part of that. And we have Madeleine with Sanofi GBS. They have scaled a multifunctional GBS organization across the globe with about 5,000 FTEs now. And Martin represents Digital Skills Accelerator Africa. He's also the founder and CEO of Amalitech. A lot of work in the future location, Africa. We'll talk about that. Thanks, Martin. And then we have Stefano representing Arval. He's the Chief Operating Officer, managing about 2 million vehicles in 28 countries. I don't know how anybody can manage that, but you do a great job. Stefano had about 400 employees on GBS and 500 in IT offshoring. So once again, thanks everybody for joining in. It has been a great report that was shared today morning by ABSL, and it is refreshing to take a step back and see how big the industry has become, how critical, how impactful. But I want to start by asking the fellow panelists that GBS shared services market operates in about 80 plus countries, employing millions of people across functions, great adoption across global 1,000 and other firms. Shouldn't we have figured out locations problem by now? Why are we still talking about it? So, Madeleine, if I could start with you.
Sure. Maybe I give a little bit of context before we start on the location question. I have the pleasure of representing Sanofi, and we doubled down and completely reset our GBS strategy last year when we firstly said that we wanted to make this truly an enterprise agenda. We then decided that we would have a representative in the executive team leading business operation. So I have the pleasure of representing this function in Sanofi's executive team. And then, of course, as we were exploring opportunities to move into uncharted territories, away from the typical corporate function scope, I think that really raised the question, do we have the right locations in place? Because when we initially started the hub footprint, we selected based on the standard activities that you'd find, procurement, finance, HR. But now, actually, our expansion strategy primarily focuses on core value-generating functions. So we're moving a significant portion of commercial operations activities into our shared service locations and complementing that, of course, with a very strong footprint in markets. We're moving R&D activities, and in manufacturing and supply, we're going to have a range of activities represented in our near and offshore locations, covering activities like supply chain, quality, and also logistics activities. So that's the exciting agenda that we have ahead, and that really raised the question mark, do we have the right footprint in place, and what are those new and upcoming potential locations that can offer us, for example, a breadth of talent, for example, in the medical space, R&D, supply chain capabilities, etc.
Great. So you wanted to look at new locations across that breadth of services. Stefano, why do you worry about locations?
We review constantly locations, so it's a never-ending exercise. I think there are three main criteria. The first one is the nature of what we try to nearshore. And for example, we have a different strategy for information technology than from I would say, the rest of the business. And that nature may bring you very far from home, from your customers, and may decide either you insource or you outsource. So for us, typically India for information technology is a great place to be, and we can very easily outsource. On the other side, when we go to, because of the nature of the business, the languages, Probably most of you know what Arval does, but if not, we basically provide your company cars in the bank. So we have millions of drivers, and unfortunately, they're not all bilingual in English, so I need to speak Portuguese, Slovak, German, Swiss, whatever. And so one is the nature of the business that will decide whether we go far, we go close, insource, outsource. The second one is the risk, how big we want to be. So if I take the group in Paribas in Portugal, we're already close to 10,000. How big we want to be in India. Arval has already 400 people in Slovakia. Is it the max? And that depends on, we will see talent, geopolitical risk, how many criteria that has to fit with your risk. The third one, I would say, is also behavior. One thing I didn't hear this morning is what happened just a few years ago with COVID. Before COVID, when we were talking nearshoring GPS services, it was a bit of pain. Oh, it's complex. We have, we have to be all together. But from one day to the other, we had 8,500 for 100% of our staff working from home. So what before was a bit weird, after has become a standard. And now we, for example, has a rule 50% home office. So that has opened completely the mind of our management around those opportunities. And this is why now everyone wants to find locations, someone to close in their area. And this is why we constantly look at these three criteria to determine whether we stay on that strategy. We, of course, are advised by the best consultants because it's a very complex environment.
And perhaps a little bit flexibility with the ability to hire or remotely. Anna, Nestlé has a very extensive network of their own.
Yes.
So why, with that already in existence, why still worry about being right in where you are?
Yeah, so in Nestlé we have a mature GBS organization, several years already, more than 15 years, some of the centers. And the model that we have is the follow the sun. So we have 7 centers across the world. We operate globally using the same technology, but we are close to markets, businesses, and we try to fit, the cultural specificities of every place. So we are not thinking on changing the footprint, but the reality is that the more we go into global projects, the reality is that the centers, they are becoming, in some cases, like the one we have here in Lisbon, is not just a geographical or regional center. We are from here running marketing operations globally.
Great. And I heard somebody describe local concepts. It's the global and local context both. But good. Before we go on, Fredis, Martin, also just wanted to get your quick input as well. Fredis, you are helping a lot of companies. Martin, you are looking at talent supply yourself. Anything to add based on why the location decision remains a bit of a tricky scenario?
Very briefly, because I feel like I'm the new kid on the block, even though when you look at me, it doesn't feel that way. 20 million people graduating from university every year. Average age 20. By the end of the century, 2 billion people. That's Africa. And I talked to many Global 500 companies about their location strategy when it comes to global sourcing. And many of them admit they don't have Africa on the map. It doesn't even show with a little paragraph on the map or in the strategy document. And my call to all of you is you need to figure out what Africa has to present and what Africa has to offer. I'm not saying leave India. I'm not saying go away from East Asia or Latin America or Eastern Europe. But all these locations will sooner or later be maxed out in terms of capacity. Even India, which now gratefully enjoys the kind of dividend in the next 20 years, is going to be flat soon when it comes to demographics. And we're going to see population decline, and we see kind of rising salaries and all this kind of stuff. which is great for the people. And that's what I'm saying. Yes, India needs to be on the list, of course. But I'm saying also the next 10 years, if you want to be an early mover, Africa needs to have a chapter in your strategy. That is what we can see over the last 5 years since we worked there with over 25 companies providing services out of various countries in sub-Saharan Africa and all the way up to the north in Egypt, where we see great talent who basically are eager to do great jobs, but they need to be given an opportunity. So put it on your map. I think it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think to answer directly to your question, why we haven't figured it out, we have figured it out. It's just the thing is that the external circumstances change every day. So something what is good today is not good enough anymore tomorrow. And we can take Latvia and Riga as an example in that way that historically, I remember maybe 15, 20 years ago, I worked for a BPO center, which, I mean, mostly was driven by, the value proposition of Riga was mostly driven by labor arbitrage, right? It's cheaper cost, we have people speaking Nordic languages, German, French, so everyone came to Latvia. And about 8 years ago, I remember I was sitting in the management room when I was still managing a GPS, and everyone seemed very super relaxed. The business was coming, everyone was making good money, everything was fine. And I'm like, but what are we going to do in 5 years from now? Because the labor arbitrage is decreasing, right? So what will be our value proposition going forward? So now it's changing. Now we're not selling the idea that it's just cheaper, although it is cheaper than in many European locations, but it's better. I mean, there is quality, there is good education, which was built over the last 30 years. There is a lot of people coming to study. Let's say we're #1 driver for international students is medicine. So a lot of these aspects that has been developed over the years, which allows us to propose a different value proposition, and that way we also attract different kind of investors at this point and different kind of GBS centers and BPO centers. So circumstances change.
Great. So circumstances change, and not just on the demand side, but on the supply side as well. So you need to kind of continuously revamp the strategy. Let me bring it back to you, Madeleine. You have been scaling the operations and technology and other teams. How do you see the demand changing for the model? And what Fredis just said, it used to be very different kind of nature of work not a long while ago, but increasingly with process improvements, technology intervention, all the new transformation that's happening. And the art of the possible has also kind of grown and changed. So people are considering moving work which was not on the radar earlier. So the demand portfolio for the industry is changing. How do you see that changing, and what are the expectations from the delivery landscape?
We've taken the well-proven GBS blueprint and applied it to all of our core functions. I think it required initially a lot of education, of course, with our colleagues in commercial, R&D, and manufacturing and supply, but I think the value proposition was very clear to colleagues. We had hubs with great talent pools, and we opened a new site in Hyderabad in India, which we're scaling up right now. But we embedded it into a network of hubs, which ensures that there's also sufficient proximity for the various different functions. And if I think about some of the capabilities we're building, for example, for our manufacturing and supply colleagues, we require the combination of a niche skill with language. And this is actually where Europe comes into play, where we're now proactively looking at how we can complement our site in Budapest with those type of capabilities. And that requires us obviously to be really thoughtful around how we're shaping our location strategy, not being too stagnant and sitting still on the 4 locations that we have in very established locations, and really winning over our colleagues from a change management perspective with the incredible talent that we find in these locations. I think there was a question regarding, are the days of offshoring over? Are we bringing things near shore or maybe back into markets? I think we had the opportunity with all of the core functions to really rethink the op model, There's no function where we're going for 100% of the process in a shared service hub. We're building an operating model which ensures there's still proximity to critical stakeholders, and then, of course, evaluating what type of activities we want to retain in a nearshore location versus offshore, and being really thoughtful around that to ensure that we are onboarding our stakeholders and over time optimize the footprint as we stabilize and mature the process. But I think that's the benefit of starting from scratch for some of these core functions, because we can be really thoughtful and integrate learnings as well from the early days of near and offshoring.
Great. And Stefano, when you look at it, and some of your requirements are also fairly complex, you need people to talk to your premium customers. How do you look at the demand portfolio and what is changing, especially with all the technology intervention, transformation coming into picture? Do we really expect millions of these jobs to get impacted? How is the demand portfolio changing for you?
So the first demand comes, in our case, like many times from the shareholder, right? It's sad, but it's like this. We have 4 main reasons to push for GPS. One is cost. That's obvious. We need to be competitive. It's a competitive market. 2, most of our countries are in Europe, and so they're not so big compared to the US or Asia, but that means that I cannot reproduce 28 times small companies. So the way we call our GBS centers, we call them competence centers. Why? Because we say, but the first thing is to bring together competencies and offer them to our companies in each country. There's one other very strategic topic, is when you run processes very different, because we produce what we sell, we produce it locally. We don't have a factory somewhere and then we just distribute the product. We buy the cars locally, we run the drivers locally, we do all these locally. So one of the things is by having competence center or GPS, we converge processes. If I ask 28 countries to agree together on how should be the process, the target operating model, that will never happen. And even though they agree, just to roll it out, it would take ages. If I decide to put this responsibility in a GPS center, it's going to take 3 times less or 5 times less. So it's really efficient. And the last one, of course, which is not cost-based, but it's productivity. Mm-hmm. If I can run a topic from one location, there is the scalability, and that makes our life more efficient, the journey for the customer, because behind there's all the digital. Now, one thing you've raised is, what about new technologies? Yet we're not sure about AI. It's going to come. It's going to be huge. We're quite sure. My personal view is that AI is not the best friend of GPS. Why? Because if I take, for example, we do credit analysis. When a customer wants a card, it's like where he was asking money, so I need to do a credit check analysis. Today I have human beings doing this, and of course they have to do it in all the different language. Tomorrow with AI, we break the barrier of the language, so there's no more language barrier. And 2, what a human being does in several hours, it will be done in a nanosecond. We'll just have a supervisor checking if the analysis of AI is correct or wrong. So that will strongly reduce our need for GPS. And most of our GMs tells me, Stefano, I don't need GPS anymore. I can do with AI locally. I said, no, it doesn't work like this. Let me do it for you.
I think that's powerful. So not a friend, but let me do it for you. So you have to embrace that so that it becomes part of the offering versus an alternative to what you offer, right? Fredis, let me ask you, so you hear a bit about in your day-to-day, you see the supply, the demand side, how's that changing? Now, I know you want to, you believe and you want to tell us how great Riga is. I believe that too. I've been there twice in last 1 year. But you also know the truth about the challenges that locations have, the limitations that they have. You constantly compare yourself with other locations, both nearshore and offshore. So if you were to just take a critical look and tell us what supply side needs to do, what needs to change in the locations to be more ready for where the demand is going, what are those aspects and what are the changes needed to continue meeting this evolving demand?
You know, and I might get into a bit of a human capital topic and the talent, because I think this is the most critical and most important part above everything else. I took this job about 2.5 years ago, and at that point, whenever in Latvia I would switch on TV or listen to politicians and any other officials speaking about how should we attract investors, they usually would talk about tax. We should, decrease one of the taxes by 1%, and there will be a line of investors standing, or change some incremental legislative whatever, right? So the whole conversation was around that, and whenever I get into the room with a potential investor, almost nobody is asking me about the taxes and legislation. Yes, it is a question at some point in the deeper discussion, but 60% of that conversation is around talent, making analysis for potential investor. Do we have the talent? How much it costs? What's the projection? How much of them are, graduating university every year, et cetera, et cetera. So we had to do this, and I realized at that point that I need to be some kind of translator between what I hear in those private investor conversations towards politicians who were talking all the time about taxes and thinking that that's the main issue. So we did many things to attract talent as a city. One of them is marketing activities. We try to connect existing investors and their needs with talent globally. It's a big question for us because a lot of talent to Riga were coming from Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, which is not the case anymore. So we're now testing and advertising, I think, in 10 or 15 plus countries globally, advertising Riga as a place where to live. We went also on the process side, so we look at the end-to-end process from the moment when someone applies at our embassy, so let's say in India, for a visa in Riga, to the moment when they come to the country, start working on day one. So we make the process easier. The third one is we're helping also companies and private persons to do that change and come to Riga to work. So for instance, for the first time, we introduced a financial system for companies where they can get money for covering their relocation costs if they bring someone. But also a huge potential for Latvia is that we have around 200,000 diaspora representatives living all over the world. So we also introduced financial support for those people to come back to the country. So yes, so mainly it's about making sure that we as a city meet that demand for potential talents.
So I like you stayed on human capital, and I think Tiger said earlier today that it started with talent, and he said it ends with talent, but it eventually comes back to talent. So you spoke about kind of boosting the supply, you spoke about incentives and making the process easier. What about skilling initiatives? Because the profile of job is changing, especially with technology coming into picture. So do you think enough is being done to make the talent ready to do the job that they're supposed to do in near future?
I think it's an interesting question. I'm now thinking about Riga, and I'm not sure if it's in other locations the same. I think that looking back on the past 5-7 years, I think who did the best job in transforming the skills were actually the companies and NGOs. Like, for instance, we have an NGO called Riga Tech Girls, and the whole idea is to ensure that more girls select IT as a potential career in the future. Now, as a result, we have one of the highest numbers of IT professionals, females, in Europe, right? So there are a lot of this semi-private but also financed by the government, different kind of programs which are focused on reskilling talent, but reskilling it in a quite agile and fast way, and reskilling while they're also connected to real investors and to real jobs. Instead of putting them in classes for the next 3 years and then waiting for a result, we need something more agile and fast. And I think we've been quite successful in that, between cooperation with government and private sector through the NGOs and other instruments to do that.
Great.
Yeah, sorry to add here. I think to adapt the supply of the talent is needed to collaborate with universities and with education, just to ensure that the skills that we need are the ones provided in.
Right. And Anna, go ahead, Matt.
I think to the question on how technology is going to change the world of GBS, the jobs will still be there, but different jobs. What you said, higher up in the value chain, kind of more value add type of profiles and jobs, that is where it will go. I don't believe at all that we need less people, but they will do different jobs. We see that at the moment in Ghana, we have 500 people there doing software engineering. When we started, there were, you would call them, most of them, coders. So they would basically take a very specific set of tasks and they would translate them in software code. Not anymore. They use tools to do the software code generation. And they needed to move up to software engineers taking problems and basically put it into solutions and then feed the system to get the software code. So this kind of upskilling, to your point, Anna, this kind of upskilling is absolutely critical and it will be a continuous journey. It's not going to stop. But if we have that in mind, we don't have to be worried about technology. It's going to be a major productivity boost for many processes and in particular in IT. And when we look at companies who are probably still at around 30, 40, 50% of their digital transformations at best, it will be fantastic to see them going quicker and faster through digital transformation processes because they have skills with higher productivity available.
I completely agree. I think in the end, coming back to the location topic, you want talent who can integrate Gen AI solutions in the processes that they already own. We're beyond piloting, for example, content generation with Gen AI, and that's going to be embedded in a process. It may alter some of the roles as you highlighted, but actually it brings more of the scope into business operation that allows us to now provide an end-to-end solution, including the Gen AI content that we generate, but also the relationship we manage with agencies if there's any fallout from the solution. So this is where I think you can see in all of our hub locations, in particular in Budapest and Hyderabad, that we have great talents who also reinvent themselves and really adapt these solutions.
No, that's absolutely right. In fact, if I connect that to something I saw in Africa, and my foray into Africa was exactly a decade ago. We were supporting Rockefeller Foundation with the Digital Jobs Africa initiative, and we were building the business case of moving those jobs, ITES jobs to Africa. The hunger to learn new skills and the urgency and the investment is different. And personally, I've seen the developing countries, the talent in the developing countries show greater hunger because they believe there's a lot more competition. They are not exactly looking at so many opportunities, so they want to be ahead. So in that context, bringing this back to Europe and how European locations can ensure they have a competitive edge, or I would not even say necessarily an edge, but what role do they play in the global scheme in future? So from that context, again, Madeleine, if I stay with you, you are growing, you earlier said both Budapest and India and possibly more locations. So how do you think about the balancing act, and how do you also address that there is a conversation in the background, right? We are part of so many of these discussions. There is often a discussion about over-dependence on offshore, geopolitical instability is increasing, and then people want to bring back jobs to Europe, but can they really do that? So how much of this is the right shoring versus the right balance between different locations?
As I mentioned, we're thinking about our locations as a network of locations. And of course, we're building in, for example, continuity planning and can actually transfer activities from one hub to the next. So we want to ensure, and we're selecting, that we can build multidisciplinary capabilities there. I think in the end, it needs to be the right strategic fit. We are a Europe-headquartered company. We have a large footprint in France and in Germany. Naturally, we would want to co-locate activities, or at least be in the proximity of these stakeholders. And therefore, we still believe in quite a significant footprint in Europe and are likely going to add another location on top of the footprint we have in Budapest to add some of these niche capabilities that we may not be able to hire at the same scale in the other locations. So we'll always be on the lookout. I think it's become very much a capability-driven strategy. We've long moved away from the cost efficiency narrative that would have also, from a change management perspective, not worked in our organization, and think about value creation, picking locations where we have the talents that can add value in the organization. And it comes through, obviously, digital native talent, but it also comes through individuals who know how to work with stakeholders across the business and really contribute to the strategy of the organization.
Yep.
Well, bring the jobs back to Europe is a wonderful idea in theory, but reality will basically tell us that's not possible. Because the boomers, and I'm part of that, will go into retirement in the next 5 to 10 years. And that is roughly 25% to 30% of the workforce. And we will not be able to kind of compensate for that in any way, nor through technology, nor any other kind of means. So I know that I have to, or anybody who sends a new message needs to send it like 20 times so that it resonates. I will only do it twice. Our neighbor continent, right across the Mediterranean Sea, with, by the end of the century, 2 billion people, that is Europe's answer. I wholeheartedly believe that. And some of you might think, yeah, let them do this. I will look at this in 10 years, and then I will see what they have done. Well, that's definitely one option. And the other option is to say, okay, let me join this. There is no other way for Europe. We should not kid ourselves. The demographic situation of Europe is so clear and dire that we don't have any other option.
Well, let me be a bit more positive about Europe, I think.
I love Europe.
We are here in Portugal, is part of Europe, and what we can say, everyone that is living here, that it's a place where everyone wants to come. It's not just Portugal. I think in Europe, people around the world wants to come to Europe. They like to live in a freedom context, in a democratic countries. They want to live in a safe place, so there are many things that are attractive in Europe. And the talent from other continents are really willing to come here. And we have examples, and people are coming. And I'm not sure if we will be able to compensate demographics. So yes, we have the gray tsunami coming in. So a lot of people will go into retirement, but I'm quite positive that Europe will compensate with people from other continents, be in Africa or be in Latin America, but people will come, and I still think there is a place for Europe here. Yeah.
So I think to kind of connect that, I think that's true, but there is also that balancing act that realistically, the demographics are not there to support the entire demand. And from a cost perspective as well, it is important. While arbitrage is shrinking, it's not going away, and the cost of living crisis is real. So what you said, it's a network. When you need large locations, you need for different skills, you need small specialized hubs. It needs to be a network, and probably Africa needs to be in there, but how quickly will companies add that remains the key. So let me ask another question. So moving on from the human capital talent aspect, if I could get one quick response from each of you, what other factor makes or breaks the location model, right? So what else impacts your choice to move in or out of a location apart from talent? What's the most important factor that you worry about right now?
Well, I think it's to be close to at the end to your clients, no? To the business and to the people working in the company. So it's the talent and it's the proximity to the local needs.
Proximity?
Yes, proximity and cultural proximity, not only physical one, but I think just a quick comment on also your comment about Lisbon. I think the fact that there is obviously a problem coming with replacing the people who is retiring in Europe. We'll definitely see more smaller GPSs and more larger footprint, but I want to say that we all are used to thinking that, okay, we need a GPS, what do we have? We have Lisbon, we have Budapest, and we have Warsaw, right? I'm exaggerating a bit, but we already see now that it's going to push organizations to explore more new locations across Europe to complement what they need. And it's interesting, we discussed it with you also in the background before coming up here, since I'm also responsible for the tourism. It's the same happening in tourism. I just read a new forecast of Booking.com. Basically, they're saying that they're going to push, the tourists would want to go to Tier 2 and Tier 3 locations. Because also large cities, I mean, Barcelona doesn't want to see a lot of people anymore. Like Amsterdam is doing everything to kind of push out. So there is a problem that certain locations are becoming overheated with the number of GPS centers, and that will push eventual organizations to explore more new European locations.
You're right. In fact, at Everest Group, we evaluate more than 50 European locations where we actively advise our clients. And it's very surprising still how many of our clients, when they come in, they're only thinking about top 6 to 8. So you have to educate a lot of them on all the other possibilities. But let me continue. So you spoke about the proximity, you spoke about the specialized nature of the locations and skills. Madeleine?
We're very much thinking about flexibility. We made a promise to the organization when we stood up business operation that we would build something which is fit for growth and provides us the agility, and that means, being able to move talent in and out. We talked early on about that, the ease of moving talent. I think the attractiveness of a location in order to attract potential talent also from our existing locations, not just the shared service locations, but also our markets, manufacturing sites. And then, potentially also the strategic importance of the particular market, because we are almost fully co-located, with the exception of Hyderabad, with our business in the respective markets. So we take that into consideration as well. And we have a lot of the commercial leaders always pitching in, for their locations. And that's important as well for us strategically.
Well, that's important, especially the agility of transformation with co-location. So, Martin?
Well, I think it is almost being said that the geopolitical risks that we are seeing, and just the last 3 years, when we look at all the events, simply dictate that there needs to be a network of locations in place for global companies, obviously pretty much around the globe, with a kind of overlap of services across those locations, so that the risk is kind of managed and resilience also in the GPS operations exists. And at the end of the day, this is one of the fundamental learnings over the last 3 years, that this is absolute paramount to have that in place. So this is, beside talent, probably the other very important thing. Cost has been mentioned, but it depends obviously on the services being provided, whether it's of relevance or of less relevance.
Yep. Stefano?
Of course, I'm a great believer of Europe. So for a company like ours, where we're 8,500 people, so quite small, I would say, we already have 3 hubs in Europe. So Bratislava, Warsaw, and Madrid. As I said, information technology is in India and Lisbon, so 4 hubs in Europe, and we're just 8,500. And then we're opening South America. So I really think, but I really like the idea of the baby GPS. We'll never be 10,000 in one location at our size. Probably BNP Paribas group size, yes, but at our size, Arval will never be there. But it's not because we're small that we cannot take really the essence of GPS, reduce the risk, mitigate the risk, diversified. My dream, when I say this to my HR, she sometimes thinks I'm crazy, but I really dream that in Europe, in a company like Arval, if you're hired, you can choose between 4 locations. You can be in Paris, you can be 5, Paris, Lisbon, Madrid, Bratislava, or Warsaw. Because again, COVID has demonstrated that we can work from home. And our plane, sometimes we can travel. So what was not really possible before, today you can really make it very easily.
Got it. So I think in conclusion, the demand is evolving and evolving at a pace. The possibility has expanded. It is important to look at the evolving supply side as well and continuously kind of reevaluate if you're in the right location and what needs to adjust. It's not about small or large hubs. Do the right thing based on your needs. So, gentlemen, I'm sorry, but I see we are out of time. So I'll give you one last quick comment, Stefano, if you have. But Stefano, if you have a quick comment, we'll finish with that.
Stefano just told me he wants to do a pilot in Africa. That's exactly what I want to do.
Brilliant. but thanks a lot. And thanks to everybody. Feel free to find these people around and continue the dialogue. And thanks again.